welcome to the studio, Mr. Croom. We're so excited to have you. We're so excited to talk to you today.
Thank you both.
So you were an AP World History teacher at the high school for many years. I know you taught both Madeline and I. We loved having you, but I know there's a lot of people that don't know you, so we just wanted to kind of get to know you and a little bit about your background. And but you mentioned that you actually have a degree in fine arts and not in teaching. So tell us a little bit about what that was like and kind of how you got interested into that and what your career in that was like.
Well, ever since I was a little boy, I was always able to draw. And I used to go to art classes. My parents sent me there when I was growing up. And when I got to college, I made a decision to go get a degree in fine art, not graphic arts. I want to point it really wasn't offered in the 1970s. So I started college in 1973 at Columbus State University in Columbus, Georgia. That's my hometown. And I have a Bachelor of Arts degree in fine art, and I kind of minored in history at that time.
Yeah. What was the transition like, becoming a teacher after having a fine art degree?
Well, for a number of years, I worked for the government. I was actually I need to point this out. Being an artist in the historical sense, there's only maybe a couple hundred people in the United States that can really do that, like Michelangelo and Da Vinci. And I was never at that level. I was kind of fair, okay? So you had to find, degrees or areas of interest or jobs that you would that would fit into that. And I stumbled into, and I won't try to explain all of it, but I worked in what they call the Army and Air Force Exchange Service. I was working with the United States government, Army and Air Force bases, and I would design the inside of stores.
That's really cool.
That's cool.
It was different, and but I was not very happy. And in 1992, my wife and I found ourselves in Texas and decided we wanted to come back to Alabama. We'd been living in Montgomery for a while. We came back to Birmingham and worked in business for a while. And then my company had gone out of business. The economy was kind of going up and down at certain times. And my wife had suggested to me, why don't you try to substitute teach for a while? And she said, you've always enjoyed teaching Sunday school, and I used to work with Boy Scouts. And I said, okay, And in late 1999, I was a substitute teacher at Oak Mountain Middle School. And I remember sitting down at the desk, and I remember the instant it happened. It was one of those things, you had this epiphany, this is where God wanted you to be. And I said, I want to be a teacher.
That's awesome.
So yeah. I had to go back to school again, and I was in my 40s. But I wanted to teach history. So I had to I went to the University of Montevallo, which at the time, I believe they still do. They had a great educational program for teachers. I was like one of the tops in the state, and most of substitute teachers, the teachers when you're student teachers were from University of Montevallo. So I was seeing them all the time in there. And I wound up getting a part-time job as an instructional aide for special ed. Oh, wow. So I would do that at Oak Mountain Middle School during the daytime, then I would go to school at night. And I was having to go back and take history classes. And don't regret it at all. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work. But being a special ed aide also allowed me to see all different types of students and their different learning styles and things like that. And I work with gifted students, so I got this. I wouldn't trade my time for that for anything, because usually as a student teacher, you only get to see that one class that you're in. And I got to see 20 or 30 different teaching styles.
That's awesome. Wow.
So,
do you feel like there was any challenges that you faced going into being a teacher later than just straight out of your first degree?
It was all mental. I mean, I was 45 years old, and most people were in their early 20s. But I went in there with more of a seriousness that this is what I really, really wanted to do.
Yeah.
And so I was very focused. Still had a good time. My wife is always getting on to me. She said, don't be going out after classes, hanging out with a bunch of 20-year-old boys. And I said, I promised I would. But I thoroughly enjoyed my time down there. They had a great history department at Montevallo. Still do, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Graduated and got my certification. Actually, it's a certification to teach history because I don't have a master's. It's like I've got 2 undergraduates is the way I always try to describe it. But I graduated, if you want to say that, in May of 2003. Then in July of 2003, Dr. Mary White, who was the principal of the middle school, hired me as a 6th grade history teacher.
That's awesome.
Yes.
It sounds like that that way of going into your teaching career gave you a really big appreciation for that.
It did. Like I said, the learning, the door is always open, no matter how old you are. I used to have a sign on my wall. You may remember it says Ancaro. I can't remember Ancaro Imparo. I can't pronounce it. It's in Latin now, but it kind of escapes me. But it's like Leonardo da Vinci at 87 years old said, "I am always learning."
Yes, I remember that.
And I think it's Ancaro Imparo. So Miss Sheffield will forgive me because she usually tries to teach me the Latin. But anyway, no, I enjoyed it. Like I said, it was a challenge, because of my age, but at the same time, most of that was mental to me.
Yeah.
Because I was accepted by the students and faculty, so that was always big.
That's awesome. How did your background in art influence your perspective or your interpretation of history as you were teaching it?
When I was a boy and you were in school, when you would learn history, it was usually this president, this general, that general, this king, that king, this war, that war. And that was it. And I'm not detracting from that in any way, but there had to be more to it. It's more, as somebody told me one time, it's like a quilt. If you can imagine a quilt with patches, well, you're only teaching certain patches. And I said, there's got to be more to it. And by the time of the 1970s, things were changing. So if you can imagine a gigantic quilt with some holes in it.
Yeah.
So people started adding in African-American stories, Native American stories, women's stories. So now that quilt became more full. And I began to see this is what you needed to have added to that. As far as the art goes, I took a lot of art history classes. So when I went to school to get my history classes, I was actually able to carry those over. So I had a large background in it, in understanding the art and when it was, who painted this and why did they paint it and how it came about. So as y'all both know, I would always try to introduce that when I taught AP World History or AP European History. People had to understand that, but it's not just the art too, it's also the music and it's also the literature because it all ties in together. And just to sit there and try to strip all that out is what makes it boring to people.
Yes. I feel like that really makes that's kind of the stitches in the quilt that you were talking about is all the culture and stuff. Kind of puts it all together.
Well, both of y'all have a background in dancing. And you understand music. We were just talking about the Nutcracker.
Yes, we were.
Tchaikovsky. And
yes,
and how important that is. As a Russian composer, what's the story behind the Nutcracker? Why is it so important? Now I realize that not everybody's into that, but if you want to bring it up to more modern times, you may not like country music, you may not like rap music, you may not like classical music, but somebody does.
Yeah.
And it is part of the culture they live in. So I'll always try to bring all that together. I may be getting ahead of your question there a little bit. But
No, that's okay. Perfect.
It's the idea that it all links in together.
Yeah.
If that's what makes it interesting and not just throwing out a date or trying to, July 4th, 1776. Okay, that's when the country was founded. It's easy to memorize that. And I'm not saying that dates aren't important because they are to help you understand a chronology of time, events that belong. But there's more to it than that. It's why is that important? I also like to get into why people dressed a certain way. Or what did they eat, things like that. So it's like a big tossed salad, if you will.
Yeah. Do you feel like there was any specific aspect of your childhood, where you grew up or something like that, that really sparked that love for history in you?
Two things. My parents were the Great Depression, World War II generation. And I think there's less than 150,000 people alive that were actually fought World War II, and they're in their late 90s and early 100s, and they're leaving as rapidly. But that was the generation that raised me. And when I would go be at Christmas events or family events, my parents and my aunts and uncles, all they would talk about is the Depression and World War II. And they wouldn't go into a lot of detail about some things, but I could tell that there was something that really had impacted them that was just so tremendous or so horrible in some cases or difficult. So that's what started it. My father was a World War II veteran, but he would never talk about it. Proud of his service, but he said, well, I did what I had to do and moved on. So that was the first thing. And the second thing is, for a short period of time, we moved to Virginia. And if any state in this country takes their history seriously, it is Virginia.
Oh, yeah. For sure.
We lived on the peninsula, and every weekend, we would go to Jamestown, we'd go to Yorktown, We go to Monticello.
Oh, wow.
We go to Mount Vernon. We saw Civil War, Revolutionary War, monuments, battle sites, and stuff like that. And it was just fascinating to me. And even in classes, even in third grade was the last time I was in a school class in Virginia. I remember they were just so how important it was.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I do want to add this in there. One thing about history: you can't sugarcoat history, and you don't. You don't need to be teaching myth. Myths are all right, but you need to say what's the story behind it. Like, did Betsy Ross really exist? Well, yes, she did.
Mhm.
Okay. Did she make the first American flag? Don't know for sure, but you need to tell the good and the bad. It all comes together.
Mhm.
And hopefully, I believe in American history, the good does outweigh the bad. When I find people that are not interested in studying history, it's like you can't know where you're going to unless you know where you've come from.
Yeah.
So that's why that's important to me. And that was one of the things I would always carry with me when I would go into class.
Mhm.
One thing I'll add, there was in ancient Greece, there was a man called Herodotus. And he wrote a book called The Histories, and it's the history of the Greek and Persian wars. And it's considered the first history book.
Yeah.
But in the opening prologue, he said, why do we write history? And this is one translation of it. He said, to prevent human events from being erased by time.
That's powerful.
It is powerful because like, if you don't write it down, then it's lost forever.
Mhm.
That's why I always encourage people, talk to your parents, talk to your grandparents, learn their stories.
Yeah.
Can I share one with you?
Of course. Yeah.
My grandmother, and a few people know this, died in 2015. She was 111 years old.
Oh,
my
wow.
She was the second oldest female in Alabama when she died.
Wow.
And she had been working in the mills since she was 9.
Oh, wow.
She retired the year I graduated from high school. When I was growing up, she would always talk about seeing President Roosevelt. And I knew that Franklin D. Roosevelt, who I have an interest in, was living in Warm Springs, Georgia, and he would drive around all over that part of Georgia and Alabama. And I said, "Oh, you mean, Franklin Roosevelt?" She said, "No, Teddy Roosevelt." And I said, "What?" She said, "I was 8 years old. It was 1912, and he came through a place called Our Town, Alabama. And he was had gotten off the train and was waving to everybody. And if y'all remember your American history, he was running for the Bull Moose Party.
Yes.
And he waved, but because he was Republican and my great grandmother was a Democrat, she wouldn't let her wave back to it. And it was a wonderful story. And I was thinking, Teddy Roosevelt. She goes, "Yes, just point blank."
Mhm.
And I said, "I thought you were talking about Franklin." She goes, "No, I saw him too." And it was just like it was just a flippant remark. And I remember over the years she would still tell me that story.
Mhm.
And I would just realize just how close we were. Not so far detached from events like that.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, she kept her mental faculties all the way up to the last month of her life. So,
That's
Wow.
awesome.
Yeah.
It's crazy sometimes to think how young our country is and how recent our history can be when we're
Yeah.
learning about it, because it feels so far away, and then you get it put into perspective and you realize how close like some of our ancestors and family members and friends and people we know are involved in this, and it's really, really interesting.
well, if you ever have the opportunity to go overseas, I went in 2012. I went with a group of Oak Mountain students, Latin students, 32 of them to
Oh,
Italy.
wow.
And I've told before the story. If you go to Italy and you're talking to the Italians, you say, "How long has your family lived in this house?" 500-600 years. I mean, that's how
Yeah.
long it belongs to. How old is this building? Not very old, 500 or 600 years.
Oh my
How
gosh.
old is like we were in the Roman forums? Oh, very old, 200 years before Christ. And
Yeah.
that's the timeline to them. In Alabama, it's before the Civil War.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that's nothing compared to what goes on in the rest of the world. It's still important to us,
Yes.
things like that.
Yeah, it's crazy to see the difference in those.
Yeah. Well, so tell us a little bit about what you've been doing after retirement.
Well, it's an adjustment. I tell that all my teacher friends that have retired or about to retire. You have to. It's like you're so used to all these years, being a teacher. And I will say this, and I tell this to everybody. I said there wasn't a day that I didn't want to come to work here.
That's awesome.
There's been some times I know y'all would get under my skin. Not you two, but it's a real privilege to teach. And to be able to get up in front of students. Now, granted, there were some days I'm going, "Why am I here?" But overall, that's one thing I never could say about any other place I've worked. And the teachers here And I have to give one comment. The first year I came here, I moved up from the middle school to the high school in 2013, and Miss Schwartz kept me afloat that first year. Susan, thank you very much out there. She knows this. I've told this before. She kept me afloat that first year, so I got my feet, grounded. Even though I've been teaching, I had to learn to teach high schoolers, which is
yes.
You have to adjust to retirement because all of a sudden you're not working for a living like you used to. So my wife and I have been trying to do a little travel, here and there when we can. Spending time with our boys and our grandchildren. I've got a granddaughter who I just adore, and two grandsons who are David Connor, and Salem is my granddaughter.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. And they all live here in town, so I get to see them.
That's awesome.
But I've been doing historical lectures. So
yes.
I've been did a presentation at the Shelby County Senior Center at Herdmont Park, and I've been doing presentations. The Daughters of the War of 1812, Daughters of American Colonists, Sons of the American Revolution, Daughters of the American Revolution, and so it's been some interesting times talking with groups and things like that.
Yeah.
And recently, I've been doing some more presentations on Oak Mountain State Park. So
I remember you mentioning when we talked earlier that you actually wrote a paper in college about Oak Mountain State Park, and that how did that connect to you now giving lectures there?
One of my professors was Dr. Ruth Truss, and I had to write something for a senior paper, and she used to work at Oak Mountain State Park back in the early 70s collecting money from the vending machine. That was her job. And she said, "Are you familiar with the CCC?" And I said, "Yes, the Civilian Conservation Corps." And I said, didn't know enough about it. I mean, I knew enough to teach it, but not in a lot of detail. She said, "I want you to go find out how Oak Mountain State Park was developed." And I had strict criteria, like I could only use primary source information, interviews, and there was only 2 men left alive at that time that actually had built the park.
Wow.
And in a roundabout way, I contacted some people down to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the State Department of Conservation, and I went around interviewing this. I interviewed one gentleman and did all this research back in 2002, and I wrote a paper called "The Civilian Conservation Corps: The Development of Oak Mountain State Park, 1934 to 1937. That was the time frame it was built. And I was real proud of that. And it almost wound up being like a master's thesis. And I was really proud of the work. Even though it wasn't, it was just all this the time and effort I put into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one thing led to another. And a couple times I've actually given a short presentation on it. It's actually a PowerPoint, just like y'all were used to see it in my classes.
Yes.
Well, about 2 years ago, it was right before I retired. There was a gentleman named Tommy Weir who was working for Alabama Public Television, and he contacted me through the park. A long story here, and then he did an interview with me, and he was actually doing a documentary on the CCC in Alabama.
Oh wow!
And which I've actually got a very, very small part of. I mean, 30 seconds. And one thing led to another, and I've been invited to give presentations on the park.
That's awesome.
So I'm going to be giving another one in November. So I'm real happy to be part of that. And I'd actually been contacted by some people, and I was real happy about this part. I'm sorry I'm bragging on this one. But
no, that's okay. Go ahead.
There was 1,600 acres of land on the northeast part of the park that belonged to EBSCO Printing. And the state was able to buy it. So when they were going to add it to the park, so rather than have it being developed for homes. And I got contacted by the state. They said, "Do you have any of the original plans?" Which I did, which was kind of surprising. They actually had given them to me, but they couldn't find them. So I wound up sending them back up there, and they used that to help get the funding from the state to be able to purchase that.
That's awesome.
I mean, I was able to just basically give them information. So,
yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, I was very happy about that.
Yeah, that's really cool how things like from in college writing that paper like loop back around to now what you're doing. That's awesome.
And the other thing, I do guest presentations. I'm doing one at the school, as I told you all about.
Yes.
Mrs. Gandy, who has been a friend of mine for eons. Several years back, I had an interest in the Spanish Civil War. And In fact, it was based off the book For Whom the Bell Tolls by Ernest Hemingway, who's one of my favorite writers. And I realized I didn't know anything about the Spanish Civil War. So I sat down. Ms. Gandy helped me. We did some research. And ever since 2014, I have been giving a presentation to the AP Spanish class. And she's invited me back this year.
Yes, we're so excited.
Yes, we're so excited.
So I get to do that. It's fun, coming in here. Again, especially with y'all, since y'all are the last group of kids I taught. So I'm
Yes, we were so lucky to get you. We loved having you.
And then we know that one of your highlights from your time in Oak Mountain was being in Beauty and the Beast. So will you tell us a little bit about that?
I talk too much about it, as my wife will tell you. In the August of 2019, Mrs. Strickland had talked to me. She said they had this idea, and I think Mr. Zouch and Mr. Bender were in on it, and they wanted me to be in Beauty and the Beast. And I know that teachers have done that before, where, you come out on stage and you wave. Mr. Johnny's done that a couple of times, I think. And I said, sure, why not? And she said, here's the script. And she said, we want you to be Maurice. So I read this, and then the next day I said, this is a speaking part. And it's got singing in it, and I can't sing. Well, anyway, my wife didn't want me to do it. She kept saying, those kids are going to make fun of you. And I said, I don't think so. Not like that, So anyway, one thing led to another. And then so I had to let my hair grow out.
Yeah.
Anyway, and we did the performance of Beauty and the Beast in January 2020, and it was absolutely awesome. I mean, there's a number of students that I was involved with, and I still stay in touch with them. It meant a lot to my heart. And they know who they are, so I'm not going to mention their names.
Yeah, that's really special.
Yeah.
I still can't sing, but it was fun.
Well, that is a really, really special experience. We have loved having you in here.
Yeah,
in the studio.
Thank you.
It's been so much fun.
It's been an awesome interview. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much. Anyway, it's good seeing you all again.
Yes, it was good to see you too. Thank you.
And Goom.
Yes, Goom.